Change by design, inequality in the UK black communities. Thank you so much for coming out today to hear and listen to this presentation. Um, Hello, Wagwan. Who's in the house? Hey, hey. This is me, right? So, well, not actually me, but me in terms of how I feel about today. Because a lot of what I'm going to be sharing, a lot of what I'm going to be hopefully provoking, is work that myself and a group of us have been doing over the last year and a half. And it's really important to me. It's a really, really important project. It's a kind of passion project, but it's actually kind of gone to the core of what I think designers need to be doing and where designers need to be heading in the 21st century, especially those from the black community. So I tried to think a little bit about me. I thought this picture kind of summarized who I am as a person. We like to get to know who I am before I start speaking. So this was Christmas Day when I was 4. As you can see, I decided to take on this big turkey bone, which I wrestled from my dad. I like food, I like fun, but ultimately I like big challenges. I like to take on big things that seem really complex and really hard. And that comes from my just general sort of thinking about actually, if we want to see change, what does that biggest, best change look like, and how do we begin from there? So, a bit about me, my journey. Why am I here? Who am I? So, I'm a senior service designer and strategist, and I'll explain a little bit more about what I do. I'm the founder of Rooted by Design, aka Rooted. I have a law degree in policy MA, and I'll talk about how relevant that is. And also, I'm a new dad. So, if I start to buck a little bit, thank you. If I start to buck a little bit, you know why. And if you see like baby names and spelling mistakes, you also know why. But I want to talk through my journey because I think this will really give context to what it is that I want to kind of hopefully share and pass on today. So I came from not a traditional design background. I came from a policy design background. So I was very much the law degree, very much into human rights, very much into recognizing social justice issues. And then after I'd done my law degree, I was just like, right, I want to get involved in how things are made, how the mechanics of society are put together. And I went off did a policy MA. And whilst doing that MA, a few things really landed quite strongly with me. I remember being in one of my classes. I was one of the very few black men in the class. And I saw some statistics about health. And it was the first time I saw in front of me an overlay of the health situation in the UK. And what struck me was actually the disproportionate impact it was having on the black community. And I began to really think why. That was my question. And obviously, one of the only kind of black guys in the class, I was very much like thinking, what's going on here? Why is this happening? Policy class after policy class, I began to realize that as a community, we're often at the bottom of the stack. As a community of black people in the UK, our outcomes were actually disproportionately poor. And I began to think about, well, what can I do about this? What needs to be done about this? As I said before, feeling very much like I didn't quite understand that landscape, I felt like I needed to do more. So she's trying to sabotage me. Amazing. Great. So after I kind of came from this policy world, recognized a whole bag of issues across the black community, and that was happening to the black community, I then kind of moved into the kind of third sector space. So working in big organizations that were trying to drive change. And quickly I realized as well, with these organizations that were trying to drive change, the change that they were trying to drive or drive in seemed to only be for a certain demographic. That's how I felt. That's what I began to see. So when I began to look at issues around disability, when I began to look at issues around mental health, a lot of the services, a lot of the impact of where that was happening, where they were having impact, weren't in the community that I was taking the bus back home to. And I began to really get a tension between myself of, okay, well, where is the change coming from? I know that as a black community, we seem to be really pounded by all these issues. Where is that change coming from? The next part of my journey then kind of took me still very much in the third sector, but I moved into an innovation role and began to do innovation roles for the next kind of 4 years. So very much trying to understand, how do we make change happen? How do we see change? How do we begin to kind of see things actually take root within organizations and within communities? What's this talk about today? This talk is about racial inequalities and structural inequalities within the UK, specifically concerning the black community. This talk is about how design causes that, but also can be a solution to some of those things, and how ultimately we can see change for the communities from which we come. So those are the three things that I'm going to try and stitch together through the next kind of like 45 minutes. I've also realized that I've got a talk slot before lunch, so I won't push it too much. So I'm going to split what I'm going to share with you, this kind of talk, into three bits. So the first bit's about the UK black experience. I think it's important to talk about that. Sometimes I feel that sometimes we take it for granted that we know, but there's something about really understanding the picture of the UK and the picture of the things that challenge us as a community. I want to make a point that many of us in the black community are breaking ceilings, are doing amazing things. We're seeing progress. But when we look at the macro picture of the community, that's not the same. The second part of my talk, the second part of the talk, is going to be about design. So really recognizing what is design, what's happening in the design industry, and actually, is design a friend or foe of the challenges that the black community are facing in the UK? And then the third thing, which hopefully will be most provocative and help us really think through, is our role in creating change. So our role as designers, as those in a digital space, how do we create change from the communities that we're from? A few disclaimers. This is all evolving work. So as I mentioned before, this is something I've been doing for a year and a half with an amazing team. I'm a founder of Rooted by Design. So this is our collective work and our thinking. The black experience is not homogenous. I want to make that clear. So I'm not trying to say that every single individual will have the same experience, but there's something about patterns across our community. And what we cover may sometimes have universal application, but that's not our focus. So you might go through this and think, oh, that could relate to that, that could relate to that. Very true, but I really want it to relate to the black community today. And then the fourth thing is, this is complex. So I'm going to try, it's complex. But hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll kind of see some truths and some things that will be useful for you. The UK black experience. For me, context is the key. From that comes the understanding of everything. This is a quote by Kenneth Noland. And what I thought was really powerful about this quote is he's actually an abstract artist. And what he was basically saying is, when you look at a piece of abstract art, it's very difficult to make sense of it without context. You can't really understand the stories and the layers without understanding the context of that piece of art. And very similarly to the black community, there's a lot of complexities happen. And actually, what the challenge is, or part of that challenge is understanding the context in which that is taking place. I want to start the story from here. So I want to start the story. My parents are from the Caribbean, Jamaica. I'm a proud Jamaican, and I very much recognize that there is a story and a context behind the community I come from. In 1948, between 1948 and I think 1970, nearly 500,000 people from the Caribbean came over to the UK. They were invited to the UK because UK needed rebuilding. They needed jobs to be done that wouldn't necessarily be done by those here. And those people were so excited to come to a place of aspiration, come to a place where they could get employment, a better life for their children. These islands were often colonized as well, so they grew up thinking, motherland, this is the place where it's kind of paved with gold. But that wasn't the reality. And when they came here, I think this picture, for me, depicts something really important about the story about the black community here in the UK. This picture shows a group of women who then realize when they get here that life is not what it seems. The promises of all these things after being invited to the UK isn't theirs. No employment, no progression in their jobs. There were challenges with housing. And imagine them sitting there that have left their families behind with no money to return back to that country, but having to have to fight to stay here and make the best of life that they could make. That was hard. And then, yes, it made that community resilient, but actually that was part and the beginning of the plight that the UK black community experienced and experiences. So, this is my grandma. She is 95 years old. Say, woo! Yeah, yeah. She knows she looks Chris as well because she always talks about this picture. But I picked this up because I'm proud of her, and she is an amazing woman, and she was part of the Windrush generation. And she said to me, we talk about this stuff. We talk about what's happening with the community. I talked to her about mental health. You begin to realize that mental health issues within our community started way back when. Not just now, way back when, with the pressures that were happening with their experience of Britain, that's when it was really kicking in. And she said, it was hard then, and it's still hard now. And probably if I tried it with an accent, it would have a better kind of impact, but I won't. It was hard then, and it's still hard now. The Equality Commission in 2016 said, if you are black or an ethnic minority in modern Britain, it can often still feel like you're living in a different world. Never mind being part of a one nation society, a different world. So when they began to survey and try and understand what was happening across Britain, it was clear that the black experience generically of communities was very different from other communities. My grandma was right. Not much has changed. If we look at outcomes, black people are twice as likely to be unemployed. That even means even if you have a university degree, it is challenging to get a job. Black people are represented 3 times in the acute end of mental health services. This means that they don't even have there's not many preventative services. They kind of just go straight to the acute end, which means that often it's high security. Black Caribbean children have rates of permanent exclusion about 3 times that of the pupil population as a whole. Rates of prosecution sentencing for black people were 3 times higher than for white people. Our evidence shows that 35.7% of ethnic minorities were likely to live in poverty. So this is a snapshot of the challenges that as a community we have. And very much it's disproportionate. And what I mean by that, it's not to say that no community should or will not experience or face adversity. But for some reason, our community, the black community, seems to be facing more than their fair share and shouldering quite a lot of the poor outcomes as a result of that. So what do I mean by structural inequality? And again, let's think about my sort of framing. This is really understanding the experience here. Structural inequality is about a system that then communities find themselves very difficult to get out of. Things continue to link, and actually a way of trying to come out of a system of inequality or disenfranchisement is very challenging. So let me talk you through an example. Say, for example, you have someone called Raheem. He's 19 years old. He lives in Brixton. Raheem had challenges at school, and for some reason, he was expelled. His mother tried really hard, but for some reason, Raheem was expelled, and there was very little possibility of him finding the right kind of school for himself. Raheem then finds himself in the criminal justice system. This criminal justice system, or his experience of that, is particularly oppressive to Raheem. Raheem weathers that period of time, and he comes out of prison. We then realize that his rehabilitation rate or his opportunities for rehabilitation is a lot less likely because he's black. He then continues a process of unemployment, finding it very difficult to find a job. He then finds himself in hard times again, and it's very difficult to support his family. He has a young child. And then Raheem begins to realize that actually depression and mental health challenges seems to be something he falls into. This is an example of a story that actually many people do go through. Yes, I've made that up. But actually, if we begin to map the experiences of individuals, we can see that actually this is structural. This is hard. And my question to us as designers, my question to us as those in the digital space, what are we doing about it? How are we designing our services, our systems? How are we designing our policies to ensure that someone like Raheem is not disproportionately oppressed or marginalized? black is beautiful, but it's hard. And what I mean by that is that actually, again, we have so much rich, the culture, the communities, what we in terms of bring and offer to the UK is so rich, so much great talent, so many great things. But actually, when you do think about these things, it is hard. And because it's been going for so long, there seems to be desensitization of how hard it is in comparison to other communities. This is the second picture that I like. It's a picture again of Windrush. And I like this picture because for me, I think it depicts two characters. You got this brother here who's like, nah, don't want to show my face, not interested. But then you have this man here who looks them straight in the face. This is the press. And is like, I'm here. I've got something to offer. I've got something to do. And I'm constantly inspired by this picture because the question is actually how are we challenging and looking at some of these things in the face and saying we have a solution, we have something to do. The next part is now, once we've got this picture isn't great. Of course, we've got wonderful examples of how we've aspired, but generically and generally, based on what we can see, it does feel like a different world for many of the black communities in the UK. Is design our friend or foe? So I'm going to talk about how I believe and what we think the role design has played in the picture that we have. So design is a way of life, a point of view. It involves the whole complex of visual communications, talent, creative ability, manual skill, technical knowledge, aesthetics, economics, technology, and psychology. It's a process related to the process. The design industry as a whole, we recognize that the scale of the design economy is growing. So we recognize that design as a force for create change, to see things developed, to see things evolve is growing. Design is increasingly digital. So again, the relevance here for many of us who are in a digital space and doing technology, it's also about design. Digital enables your designs. And design is high value and growing. What do I mean by design practice? So I'm just breaking some down so when I bring it up, it makes sense. I'm talking about a collection of methods, tools, mindsets, and principles. I'm talking about the role of designers, which is about simplifying complexity, focusing on focusing on the human, being strategic, and being multidisciplinary, pulling different design perspectives together to think about how that can relate to a particular problem. Design is about solving complex challenges. And I put it to us today that there is very few, in my view, social complex challenges as prominent as the challenge facing the black community in the UK. I believe that the challenges that the black community face in the UK are complex, are intergenerational, are embedded and structural. And I believe that designers need to have solutions as a way to actually solve this. What does design mean? So we just kind of said this is what design means. But where's the direction of design going? What does the role actually look like in terms of everyday life? Well, we're seeing industrial designers. Many of you guys here might be product designers. You might have gone and studied industrial design, creating things, solving problems within society to create a thing so we could do things. Then we kind of move to the kind of services and product areas as well, of actually designing things, services that interact with different users and with businesses, etc. But design is also moving further to policy, to looking at how designers are standing and sitting with civil servants to ensure that actually what they're designing is related and linked to the communities that it's designing for. And then the fourth element of, I think, the spectrum of design is also systems. So this is about complex systems around social care. This could be about complex systems around finances. How do designers, the role of designers play in making sure that they connect to achieve a goal? So what's design got to do with the community outcomes? Where's the link, Julian? Well, you see, everything is designed. Everything is designed. Few things are designed well. Everything is designed. The chair we're sitting on, this particular event, the services we engage with, the policies we have to adhere to, the legislation we have to adhere to. Everything is designed. And what that means is that there are designers and there are those that they are designing with, as many of us know. But the issue is there has been a failure to design services which meet the Black community's needs and accounts for our lived experience that has contributed to poor outcomes. If we go back to Raheem's journey, many times, just like it was when Windrush Generation came, services are not meeting their needs. Services are not accounting for their lived experience. And this still happens today, hence why we have those outcomes. So I believe this is where, for me, there's a failure. This is where, for me, as designers, we've got to think about, actually, we can't allow design as a practice to keep failing. It has to do something. It has to offer something to these complex issues. So the questions that need to concern us are a few of these. So one, who's doing the designing, right? So when we think about the services that are in our communities, the services that maybe are failing communities, who's designing them? How are they designing them? What's the methods and the tools? So what we're recognizing is that existing services aren't working. Existing services are maybe missing the mark in different ways. So we need to think about, actually, how are we doing this? How are we designing with a community that is marginalized? How are we designing with the Black community? What does that even mean? What does that look like? And then the third one I think is really important is, how does it feel for the communities? So when you think about, let's think about public services, and there needs to be a change in the way that a service maybe operates in Lambeth, for example, or Hackney. That process of co-design, that process of consultation, what does that feel like? And actually, when we think about the communities, and based on my research, it doesn't feel great. The way that things are designed with these communities doesn't feel great at all. And there's something very significant that we've got to take note in regards to those things. So just again, to repeat, who's doing the designing? So that's really about representation as well. That's important in regards to who's leading the change for the services for the communities that we belong to. How are they doing that? And how does that feel for the communities that we're from? So, rooted by design, rooted. We are kind of a community of Black designers, collaborators, and allies who kind of share a deep concern for disproportionate inequality and structural injustices, the things that we've been talking about. And together we're exploring the role that design can play and should play in creating the change that we believe needs to happen in the UK. We want to see outcomes significantly improved, and we believe that actually designing services and solutions in a way that really meet the needs of the communities is critical. So here's a few that this is us as kind of the team. We've been together for working together for maybe the last year and a bit. And yeah, it's been great. So part of what's been really on our minds as a group of designers, and we're kind of all different designers. So we've got those that come from a visual communications background, those come from a policy, UX designers, those very strategic, but we all share a belief that design as a principle and a practice is important in solving some of these issues. But the question that we've been asking ourselves as designers is, how might our design practice need to adapt or evolve to design better services and solutions for these marginalized communities? How do we do this differently, right? It's all good and well kind of saying we should, but the next part of it is the how, which is the hard bit. The question that someone might ask after that, how do you design differently? Some might say, well, isn't this just about inclusive design? Isn't this just about making sure when you are a designer, you're including everyone, you're including all groups, you're including all communities in that particular design? And I think inclusive design does have something to offer in the sense that it wants to include an excluded group that's been typically excluded. But inclusive design, in my view, has limitations. Inclusive design doesn't really address one of the critical issues, which is about equity. Inclusive design is recognizing we need to include everyone to come up with these solutions. But actually, not everyone is on the same level playing field. That's the first thing. So creating a solution for everyone is great in principle, but actually, not everyone's on the same starting point. So it means that, yes, you might improve things, but again, the inequity between communities would remain. This is our belief. Inclusive design also doesn't delve deeper into the impact that the inequality and inequity has had on that community. It doesn't delve into what has this caused. Because if you don't understand what not having services and support for 20, 30 years has meant to a community, it's very difficult to inform our design of how we do that well. And then the third one, it doesn't account for the historical lack and therefore the need for more to be done. And what I mean by this is that actually equality is basically saying, let's give everyone something. Let's give them all a service. Let's give them all a product. Let's give them something that they can all use. But actually, my man on the right, he can't see over the fence. So giving my man on the right all these things is all good and well and might look really fair, but actually it's unjust. Because my man on the right is shorter and has different disadvantages that have never really been considered. Equity shifts that conversation. Equity says everyone needs to see over the fence. And it means that we need to think of ways in order to create the services and solutions to support those who need to see over the fence more, or who've not seen over the fence yet. Inclusive design as a practice, and I think it's great to create solutions and services by being inclusive, but it doesn't account for the lack that that community has had for many years. And that's the point that I really want to bring home. I also want to pick up something about inclusive design as well, just as something that's really been on my thoughts, is that actually, when we think about inclusion and accessibility, we talk often around different other factors that stop people from accessing something. Disability, for example, or, and I worked for a disability organization and recognize the importance of that. But actually, accessibility and inclusion should also be about race. There are also barriers within our society that makes it difficult for those to engage with services, whether that's language barriers, whether that's the fear of racism, whether that's the poor experience you had of the service before, whether that's stigma. All these things are barriers and need to be considered. So the big question for us is, what would an equity-centered approach to the designing services and solutions look like? What would that actually mean? And for us as the group of designers trying to really get our heads around this, as designers should, trying to really understand the different perspectives and the different facets of the problem, and coming up with something that we can test and explore, we really want to explore this a bit more. And actually, we were very fortunate to be able to engage with an organization that was currently doing a big project in Lambeth looking at the disproportionate impact of mental health on the Lambeth community. And the aim of that project was to create a new way to support and design services so that the Black community had services that they could actually begin to engage with. And we took some interesting learnings from that I think began to build out for us a sense of what we think this new approach could look like. So the first thing is, if you want to take an equity-centered design approach, you are talking about designing more, right? So going back to that, it's about recognizing that you're going to have to design more. There's going to have to be more effort and time put in to ensure that communities themselves are able to kind of come up on a level playing field. The second thing about equity-centered design is actually designing differently, thinking about the factors and the elements of inequity and thinking about how that impacts on our design. Designing differently, what does that mean? So we've been working on this equity-centered design approach or practice, and to begin to build this, we began to look not just in the UK, we've been looking to the US, because the US are really ahead in their thinking about equity. And we began to think about some of that stuff and building it from the UK perspective. So the goal, what we believe of an equity-centered design approach, is one that to improve the services for marginalised communities. So we believe by taking an equity-centered design approach, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, we should see better services for communities that have experienced inequity. The second thing is that by taking an equity-centered design approach or practice, it means to improve the experience communities have of creating services and solutions. to improving that experience for them. So we began to think about, well, what does inequity look like? What does it feel like? What are the things that maybe go unsaid about communities that have experienced lack for many, many years? And actually began to ask questions about how those elements are factored in the way that we design with those communities. So the first thing is history. History matters. The history of those communities matter. Their history in terms of who they are, whether you are Caribbean, whether you are from Africa, your history matters. But also the history that your community has had within that locality matters as well. Trying to design without recognizing that history has gone before is not great, and it's unhelpful. The second thing is context. As designers, we have to, going back to that quote, understand the context in which we're designing around. We have to understand, let's put it into real terms. So if I'm going to go and design a service for ex-offenders and so forth, and actually a lot of those proportionally are going to be from ethnic minority backgrounds, I need to understand the context. I need to understand, well, why? Why is that happening? What's the media saying? What are the narratives that are shaping this context at this moment? That might be even shaping my perspective on the issue. That contextual view is very, very relevant. Trauma. And this one's a really important one for me, because when we were doing our research, we began to realize that actually there was intergenerational trauma within specifically the community that we were working with and doing the research with. That many of their experiences were kind of way back when, and they just continue to carry that trauma. And actually, it resulted in something quite hard and difficult to deal with. But that trauma is important to recognize as designers. That trauma has to be something that we recognize as real and recognize as something that needs to be healed. People might not like that word heal because it feels a bit touchy-feely and maybe clients don't like it, but it's true. Because we recognize the impact that trauma can have on the psychology of a group of people. The fourth one we've been talking about is identity. So again, recognizing what identity does how does this community identify? And how does the majority, how does those in the wider society identify them? So very much linked to context. Again, what are those narratives? And what we realize when working in terms of with Black communities around services is that we need to empower their identity through that process. We need to recognize that their trauma is real. We need to see the context as relevant. We need to affirm their history. And the last one, we need to recognize that power needs to be shared. And for us, these are really key pillars in creating change and in creating better services. And again, this is very much our working hypothesis, but something we really believe to be true. So we kind of presented that, as I said, the last part of what I'd like to talk about is, well, what's our role in creating that change? And I was really reflecting on yesterday and seeing all the pictures, and what was really good is that actually a lot of the things that we're seeing are beyond the borders of the UK in regards to where we need to see new services, new solutions, new products. But actually there's something really relevant about recognizing the change that needs to happen here in the UK. Design is a really interesting field, and digital, because actually, in my view, it's quite middle class. If you get yourself into the design field or the digital field, you're on a kind of an upward trajectory based on where the sector is going. But it can't disconnect us from the reality of our communities. And we have to, in my belief, we as individuals, as Black individuals in the UK, my kinfolk, we've got to think about that. So what can you do? Well, the first thing is, I think it's about design activism. And what I mean by that is, I'm a little bit of an activist, but I mean, it's recognizing that we all have tools, we all have skills. How are we using those to challenge? How are we using those to defend, but also using them to create, using them to solve critical problems? And actually, in our everyday lives, in our worlds, in wherever you are, where are there opportunities for you to think more critically about what this means from the communities that we're from? The second one is really important to me as well, which is about, I believe, decolonizing the design practice. And when I say that word, some people go, oh, like, oh, decolonize, and it gets a bit touchy, a bit deep. But for me, all it really means is recognizing that as a community, we need to have an opinion. We need to have an opinion on how services are being designed for the communities that we're from. We also need to recognize that we have a contribution to make to design practice about how to do that better and more effectively. So there's something about our narratives for change, our narratives for better design, our questions about the how, and actually how do we contribute and how do we actually begin to lead that change. So, as I've said, I've kind of begun to share a journey that Rooted have been on, very much grounded in the sense that actually what we want to achieve is a world that's equitable for all. That actually the communities that are typically left behind are actually getting the support and the services. We need to step up. We need to step up to think more critically and more reflectively about how we're designing and how design is being done with the communities that we're from. Rooted, as I've said, we've been on a journey for a year and a bit, and it has been so cool. Challenging at points, because there's 5 of us, and very much we're thinking, how do we mobilize this? How do we begin to open this up to individuals who are interested in design and solving problems? So actually this year, in the next couple of months, we're going to be launching officially to welcome designers to come and join us on that exploration. Not only join us to understand how we can be better, like to solve issues for the communities, but how we ourselves can be better designers. I want to end with a quote that I started with here. If I can find it. No, no. Hey, for me, context is the key. From that comes the understanding of everything. My final challenges for all of us today is really to think about the context in which we're designing, the context in which we're developing our careers, and the context in which we need to create impact. Thank you very much.